Thank you so much for joining us today or for watching this recording later on. Hope you find it useful. I'm sure you will, or at least thought-provoking. Let's get stuck straight in then. And our thinking question today is, why might upper primary children still need phonics teaching? We're not going to pause or hesitate on that one in the live session, but if you're watching on recording, put that on pause now and maybe make some notes or speak to a colleague or have a discussion as a group of you. What are the reasons that upper primary children still need phonics teaching? Those might be reasons that you know of from your experience, or things that you're hearing, things people talk about, inspectors or consultants buzzing about this idea of phonics being taught in upper primary or juniors. So here are some reasons that I came up with. It could be that English is an additional language. And within that category, that can be quite wide, can't it? It could be that English is brand new to our learners. So that's exactly the reason they need phonics, to learn to read and write as an older learner, because English is completely new. Or it could be that English is a second language and therefore they're still working on that phonics part of English to get them up and running. It could be that children have got missed learning. They could have been traveling, or they could have moved between schools, and that causes gaps in the teaching. It could be that there are children who've had some time being homeschooled. There's a bit of a trend at the moment for children being homeschooled, but then actually returning back to school after some time. It could be that there have been periods of illness, and that's caused them to have time at home and not being in education. Or, of course, it could be that they have special educational needs. It might be some slower processing, speech and language difficulties, conceptual difficulties, or a slower maturity. They just weren't quite ready yet. They weren't mature enough for the learning when they were younger. And now, as they're getting older, they're more ready to be able to learn with the phonics. Now, we did a previous webinar on special educational needs and intervention. This webinar is going to focus more on learners that are typically more mainstream. So they're older, but for different reasons, they still need phonics. We're not going to focus so much in this webinar on specific difficulties to do with special educational needs. You can watch the other webinar to extend on that. And really, my argument is that I'd like to sort of throw into the ring here, I'd like you to think about, is that actually regular mainstream learners who are on track and doing just fine with their reading and their writing, might still need some phonics teaching, because the English language is really complex. If you have delved into the English language before, particularly in terms of phonics, and then we've got all the other layers, things like grammar, English is a very complex language to learn. So even bright, able children might still need some support with it as they're getting older. I'm also interested for you to reflect on why you're interested in this topic. And for me, putting this webinar together, I sat with this question and thought very deeply about it. Why might people want to come and listen to me talking about phonics with older learners? Well, we thought of the reasons why those learners might still need phonics, but what's made you think it's really relevant? And it might be that you've been told that upper primary learners should still receive phonics instruction if they cannot read yet. This has been a message that has come through, since the Rose Review. Jim Rose did his review back in, 2005 now or something. It was a really long time ago. And ever since then, lots of reports, lots of recommendations, lots of inspectors, the Department for Education in England, have been really pushing for that if learners still cannot read, they need phonics. That is the best route into reading. And this was most recently highlighted in the reading framework that the DfE brought out and updated in 2023. Or it could be that you see the need in your school. So you're working with older learners, or you have colleagues working with older learners, and you're going, think they still need some phonics. I think phonics would really benefit them. So both of these reasons are very valid and might be going on for you at the moment. So here are some extracts from that reading framework. Here's what the guidance is saying. SSP, systematic synthetic phonics programs, are for pupils of all ages who are learning to read. Older pupils who continue to struggle with decoding also need to be taught through an SSP program. Phonics is a body of knowledge that is necessary for pupils to learn to read and spell at whatever age. Older pupils who have not yet learned to read also need such books, and they're referring to decodable books. Excuse me. So there are lots of quotes out there really highlighting and pushing this point. You need to be aware of it, even if it's not directly impacting you at the moment. Then in a summary blog of the 2023 update to that framework, it said, in the 2023 update, sections have been included to support Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 children who need extra support. The need for systematic synthetic phonics for children in danger of falling behind. And this phrase, in danger of falling behind, is something you might be hearing a lot of, and you might hear a lot more about, that we cannot wait for children to struggle. We have to be really observant, be watching them, be analysing them all the time that we're teaching them, so we can pick up really early on if they're struggling with their reading and their writing. And as I just mentioned, the reading framework builds upon many past documents, reports and recommendations. It's clear that phonics should be continued as needed beyond infants. Now, it's really important to me personally that I try to encourage you in this webinar to really think deeply about this topic, because lots of teachers say to me all the time, I'm very busy, tell me what to do and I will do it. I trust you, I know you say good things, I know you produce good resources, just tell me what to do. I'm happy to get on and do that, I trust you. And that is really lovely, that's fabulous that we have that relationship. However, it's always been important to me, and you'll know this if you're a Rocket Phonics user, that it's part of our pedagogy, that we want you to really take ownership. So you really understand why we say the things that we say. You kind of own that and you engage with the process, because I find that teachers who really try to think about why they're doing the things they're being asked to do, or what the suggestion is and how that works for them and how they feel about that, people who really engage with that and take ownership are much more able to be responsive to children's constantly changing needs. And another thing that I often talk about is this idea that you can't just put a sticking plaster on things. You can't have one solution that suits the needs of all the children in all the classrooms around the world. We have to be really upskilled as teachers to be able to constantly adapt and tweak and change our teaching as the children's needs change. And if you're a practitioner in the classroom, you'll know that children's needs change all the time. The progress can be really quick sometimes, it can be really slow sometimes, they can get stuck on a particular skill or a particular piece of knowledge, and we have to respond and adapt to that at all times. So this is why I try to dig down deep with you on these topics. I also still find that lots of misconceptions still exist. So here are some of the things that you might hear that feel contradictory, and this is just because people have different opinions or their previous knowledge is different, and another reason why it's beneficial to discuss these topics. Phonics is for babies. I remember being a young teacher, fresh in the classroom, and an older, more experienced teacher said to me along the lines of, well, no, phonics is for the little ones. Phonics is just for the babies. And of course, a lot of our phonics materials are aimed at young children. So they have very cute illustrations or language or songs or ditties that are aimed at younger children. But phonics as the subject is not just for babies. Phonics is for everyone. We use phonics all the time, especially if we're encountering new words or words that are currently unknown to us for reading and for spelling, which happens all the time. We're always developing, even as adults, even as first language speakers. Another argument you might hear, phonics is not the same as spelling. We do phonics with young children, we do spelling with older children. And to some extent, that is true. We tend to call it phonics with young children and we tend to call it spelling with older children. But actually, phonics is spelling. Phonics includes spelling. So when I talk about phonics, and we'll touch briefly again upon the principles of what phonics is in a while, phonics includes the process of spelling and learning about the way things are spelled. So it's still phonics when we do spelling with older children. Another one, phonics is for decoding versus phonics underpins fluency and comprehension. You don't just learn phonics to be able to decode words, and then that's done, tick, job done, fine, and now we can focus on fluency and comprehension. As we move on to focus on fluency and comprehension skills for reading, phonics is still there. It's still underpinning that, because you have to be really strong and confident with your phonics knowledge to be able to have that fluency and have that deeper level of comprehension. As texts become more challenging as children get older, there will be new pieces of phonics because there are new words or there are rarer combinations of the phonics in those words. And so these skills, the phonics knowledge that they already have, along with their comprehension, their fluency, it all works very much together. It's really, really tightly interlinked. These are not separate things that we do one at a time. Phonics for reading versus phonics for reading and spelling. In the reading framework, naturally, they refer a lot to reading, and you'll often hear phonics linked with the word reading and less so linked with the word spelling. But categorically, phonics is for reading and phonics is for spelling. One of the things actually that we do in Rocket Phonics is we pull those apart, even though everything works very closely together and they do benefit each other. We do pull them apart to really focus on the reading and focus on the spelling right from the very beginning, because it applies to both. And then this is a really interesting one. Phonics is enough to get going versus phonics is an ongoing need. Some academics, some very experienced educationalists will argue that phonics is enough to get learners up and running. So if we can use phonics when they're in the infants and they can get to a level that is good enough, it's okay, it's good enough to be reading and writing at a basic level. Once they're able to do that, they're on a roll, they will naturally get better and better and stronger with practice. Now, that is true to an extent, but as I sort of mentioned with the phonics includes spelling, the phonics underpins fluency and comprehension, phonics is an ongoing need. I still encounter words now, and I have to really think about other things as well. I think about, have I seen it before? Do I know what some of the root words mean? Or do I, other parts of the word, do I recognize it? But also I sound it out. I look at the graphemes, the letters in the word, and I apply my sounds to help me work out the word, and then think about, do I know the meaning of that word? Do I know the vocabulary? So there are lots of different opinions, lots of misconceptions, and you can get a feel for how I feel about this, about how important phonics is and how widely it applies. And then for you as a practitioner, I know you'll be thinking in your head, okay, we get it. Phonics is still important, but there is so much to fit in. We, as children are getting older, we have to teach them more fluency, comprehension, spelling, handwriting, grammar, composition, punctuation. And we have to teach all of these skills while we're teaching them text-inspired love of reading. So using wonderful books and texts to help the children love reading, as well as develop their reading skills. Text-inspired love of writing, to help the children love writing by analysing and looking at and deconstructing pieces of written text to help them want to write text and apply all of these skills that they're learning. And now Abby's saying do more phonics with older learners. This is a lot to fit in. How can we do that? Well, here's another way of thinking about it. This is a really useful diagram. This is Scarborough's Reading Rope 2001. And this is just a lovely way of acknowledging and looking at, gosh, yes, to become a skilled reader, and you can apply the same ideas for writing, to become skilled, to become mature and confident, and where we're aiming for with our older learners, we actually have to work on all of these strands: language comprehension strands, background knowledge, vocabulary, language structure, verbal reasoning, literacy knowledge. There's such a lot there. And then the word recognition, so the more phonics-based skills, phonological awareness, decoding, sight recognition. And we need all of those things woven together, practicing all of those, teaching all of those, becoming increasingly strategic, becoming increasingly automatic to get us where we're heading to. So that's quite handy as a diagram to help us think about this idea that there is so much to teach. How does it fit together? How can we work on this? But another thing to think about, Now, this is something that I have seen certainly in England, but I'm sure that the same will apply across the world. And it's the upper primary cliff drop. So let me explain this chart to you. Along the bottom of the chart, on the horizontal axis, we have the age of the children. So this chart is representing from left across to right, children that would be 4 years old, then 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So we're looking here at 4 to 11 of the age of the child as we move along the chart. And then up the vertical axes, we're looking at the balance of how much literacy teaching the children get in class. So how much skills based. So literacy is skills like phonics, handwriting, explicit grammar, spelling. These are our literacy skills versus how much English teaching. So an English lesson would be things like looking at comprehension of a text, enjoying the story, acting out the story, writing part, responding to the story. So if the story is about a boy who went on an adventure, and then the children might respond by writing a diary entry as that character in the story. So wonderful application of all of our skills in an English lesson, and looking at sort of literature and the use of language and applying it. And what you'll often find is that in lower primary, in the infants, so in Key Stage 1 and in the early years, we tend to do an awful lot of literacy and we do a much smaller amount of English. And then when we get to the end of what we call Key Stage 1, the end of infants, and we go into Key Stage 2, the balance seems to really shift the other way. There's a lot of pressure to do a lot more English, and literacy skills becomes a lot smaller, a lot more sort of squeezed in. And for some learners, this can cause a bit of an issue because they're not quite ready yet. They need more of those literacy skills, and it's quite a jump up. And this is where my argument would be that in upper primary, the shift should be smoother. It should be a much smoother transition. Now, this gradient is actually a bit steep on here. This is because I actually asked AI to help me to create a chart to save me some time. And it did a really good job, actually. It saved me a lot of time. But I would have preferred this gradient to be slightly shifted. So I will work on my skills of working with AI to get it to show that. But you get the idea that actually, yes, we are gradually going to do less literacy skills and more English. But rather than having that sudden cliff drop, that sudden shift and change in the way that we teach in the upper primary, we need to have a much more gradual transition. And I often find that year 3 and year 4 are particularly challenging years. So when children are 7, 8, 9, they still struggle a lot with their literacy. Question from Sham, are we going to cover how we use Rocket Phonics with Upper Primary? Yes, we absolutely are going to cover Rocket Phonics. We're going to go into Rocket Phonics content and get more practical very soon. So as we move through primary, the balance shifts from learning to read, literacy, to reading to learn English, but the shift is not universal. Many children need more time at the literacy end. Timetabling then. So how are we going to fit this in? I really encourage you to take a leap of faith with me if you are in a setting where you have some upper primary children, year 3, year 4 particularly, but all the way through. If you have children that need more literacy skills, like I've been really emphasizing to you, that you really push for a shift in your timetable, because I promise you it will make the hugest difference. There are lots of schools that I've worked with on a consultancy basis. I've gone into those schools and supported those schools. And that's one of the things that we've done. And I've said, trust me, don't have your literacy skills as a quick 15 minutes here and a 15 minutes there and 15 minutes of spelling on a Monday and 15 minutes of handwriting on Tuesday. If those children need those skills, English is going to have to get compressed for a little while, because literacy skills needs to be taught. It's that important. And the sooner you do that, so if you do that in year 3, you're not going to need it as much in year 6, unless you have children coming into the school in year 6. And focusing on those literacy skills as a priority will very quickly make the English lessons easier and more enjoyable for the learners and for the teacher. But you'll need to be thinking in your circumstances about how many children in your classes need how much and which literacy skills. So this is where there can't always be a one size fits all answer, because in one school, you might say to me, our entire classes, they all need more of this literacy. Well, then it's not going to be an intervention for 20 minutes in the afternoon. You're going to need a literacy session. You're going to need to look to your colleagues in the infants, how do they do it? How do they timetable it? How can we be clever with it? Do we timetable that for a term? And then through the year, we can move away from that. Is that going to run through the whole year? Because that is the nature of the children that we have in our school for whatever reasons that we looked at before. Or is it that you have a limited number of children? You have a group of 6 or you have a group of 8, in which case, by all means, you can timetable it like a regular intervention. It could be in a morning for half an hour. It could be in an afternoon for 20 minutes. It could be once a week, but you give them a whole hour of it. So there is complete flexibility about how that timetabling looks, but consistency matters. It has to happen. When I have worked with upper primary classes and we've had great success, we've looked at, well, what was it that made the difference? It's happening every day, or every time it was timetabled, it happened, versus the classes where, oh, well, we couldn't do it that week because something happened and our support teacher or our teaching assistant wasn't available that week, or we had sports day, then we had the play, and so the lesson didn't happen. Phonics and literacy skills have huge impact when you have consistency, and little and often matters. And that doesn't mean little and often like 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. It can do. It could be precision teaching for some intervention, but little and often matters in terms of, so you might have a literacy skills session every day, and every day you're going to do a bit of handwriting, a bit of spelling, a bit of grammar, a bit of code work, and that will build up very quickly and it will have really big impact. So timetabling depends on the nature of your school. So to make sense of upper primary phonics, we need to understand how the alphabetic code changes over time. Phonics is a spiral curriculum. Now, a spiral curriculum, if you're not aware, is not just a buzzword that people like. I'm sometimes very critical of, oh, that's a buzzword. Everybody's jumping on that buzzword. I like to really understand, if we're going to use terminology, why does it really apply? Let's call it out. But I really like this idea of spiral curriculum for phonics. So a spiral curriculum is where key knowledge and skills are revisited repeatedly over time. Each return to the topic is more complex, more detailed, or more sophisticated. Children build on prior knowledge, so learning becomes deeper and more secure. And this concept was introduced by Jerome Bruner, who argued that all learners benefit from revisiting ideas at increasing levels of difficulty. And it's exactly what you do with phonics. This is again why phonics is not finished in the infants, because there is so much code and the code is so complex. We must revisit it over and over again, but spiraling, it becoming more complex, more advanced. The skills are more advanced, the words are more advanced. You can't just touch upon it once or twice and you've mastered it. So the code is the code. Whether you are 5, whether you are 45, the phonics code is the phonics code. And the English alphabetic code can be thought of as a simple code and a complex code. So we can split it into those 2 parts to help with our thinking. The simple code is largely understood as one sound is one spelling. It's a very general way of saying it, but one sound, one spelling. It's the part that we teach to children when they're very young or when they freshly start with English. The complex code is the sound and the spelling alternatives. Now that might be one spelling, one grapheme or one letter string with multiple sound pronunciations, or it might be one sound and that sound has multiple spelling alternatives. And that's what makes our English alphabetic code so complicated, is that you can have both of those ways of doing it. We teach the simple code first, and then we spiral back around, revisiting it, and we learn new sounds and new spelling relationships. And this upward progression mirrors how reading and spelling develop neurologically. Repeated exposure strengthens that orthographic mapping. So we're not revisiting it because we didn't do a good job of teaching it the first time. We're not revisiting it because the children didn't do a good job of learning it the first time. We're revisiting it because that is the nature of how our language builds, and that is the nature of how we can best learn it to keep it fresh and keep revisiting it. Now, here's a little example from Rocket Phonics. This is a sounds mat that comes from the core part of Rocket Phonics that we would typically use with our beginners, our age 4 and our age 5. And you can see that the presentation of it, it looks like it's geared for younger learners. Now, interestingly, I do find that we cannot make preconceptions or assumptions about what children will find babyish or not babyish. There are geographical places, there are cultural areas where some children like certain styles of things and they don't think it's babyish at all. Whereas in another part of the country, in another culture, those children wouldn't like it. They'd think it's very babyish. So we mustn't make any judgments on that before we get to know our children. So that becomes quite a personal thing for you and your children to judge what is babyish and what's not babyish. This particular sounds mat has been geared towards the younger children, although lots of those illustrations, they're not as babyish as they could be. I find them quite aesthetically pleasing generally for children. But you can see this is an example of simple code. Largely speaking, we've got one sound, one spelling. When we work with older children, because there is so much code that we're trying to show, rather than using a sounds mat, unless they have specific educational needs, special educational needs where they need that layer of simplicity, actually, we work with the alphabetic code in terms of a code chart. And a code chart like this is the logistically best way of organizing and being able to show as much code as we'd like, as is appropriate for our learners, in a neat, concise space that we can see on a poster or a desktop. So I strongly recommend that with your older learners, you are using a desktop alphabetic code chart and a wall poster one as well, if you can get one of those put up. And they've got to be able to see it. Colleagues that work with younger children with phonics know the importance of, if you're going to have these visual prompts, you have them up big, you have them up where children can see them very clearly. Sometimes I've been to the classrooms of colleagues with older learners, and because those teachers are not used to working with phonics in the way that we do things, they haven't realized the importance of these visuals being prominent and being accessible, being big and being clear. And I've seen them maybe kind of like photocopied black and white and shoved on a corner of the wall that's difficult to see and difficult to access. And if they're not purposeful, if they're not being used, then they're not going to be effective. But these charts are very effective. You've got all of the sounds going down the column on the left, and then across each row, you've got the different ways of spelling. You've got that complex code building up. And it's a way that children and teachers who might not be as confident in phonics can access the code and talk about, yes, in the word whistle, we can hear the S sound, but if we look along at the actual example with whistle along that top row, the sound S is spelled with an S and a T. We have that silent T in the grapheme there. So we can show it and we can visualize it and get our heads around it. So I strongly recommend that you have those with your older learners, ideally individually, that each child has their own copy, send them home to parents, have it on the wall. Now, diagnosing gaps, something that you also might hear about, particularly in the context of England. The reading framework states that older pupils who struggle with reading must have their decoding gaps identified and addressed. Schools should assess pupils in Key Stage 2 to pinpoint gaps in phonics knowledge, not rely on general reading levels. Ofsted expect schools to use reliable assessment to identify precisely where pupils are falling behind and to match teaching to those gaps. That is very good advice. It's important advice. It's being talked about a lot. It's being talked about at Key Stage 3 in secondary schools, and also a focus in Key Stage 2 in upper primary. I absolutely agree with it. However, the code is so vast and so complex that there might be lots of code gaps, even with pupils who are absolutely on track. So there still needs to be a bit of judgment there about well, where is the barometer? Which, you know, how many gaps are you looking for? And I absolutely advocate that you take a triangulated approach. So screen all of the children, absolutely. Use some reading assessments, general reading assessments, screen all the children, then diagnose more closely. So when you've screened all the children, which of those children do you feel need to be looked at? They're really behind on their reading. You want to look at them more closely. And also build a reading profile. So I do advocate, because I have a lot of trust and faith in teachers. We are, you know, the strength in the whole process, to use your knowledge of the child. Sometimes an assessment doesn't show you what you know about that child. It might have been a bad day, or it might have been just I don't know, there might be more to it. So do also use your common sense and think of so for example, a child might not be reading well, but actually they do know their code. The code knowledge is there. There aren't gaps particularly in the code knowledge, but they're just not enjoying reading at the moment. They just need practice for their fluency, or there could be a comprehension issue. Or a child might be reading okay, they're bobbing along, they're coping, and they're not flagging up on an assessment as having any difficulties particularly, but you know there are gaps. They're not reading accurately, they're not reading fluently, and you realize that it's the decoding and the gaps in the code knowledge, and then you might drill down on that. So the idea about this diagnosing the gaps is, don't waste your time and the children's time teaching content that the children are already secure in. That's going to just turn everybody off. Everybody's going to be bored. They already know that part. They don't need that part. Having said that, the systematic and cumulative nature of phonics programs is what makes them so powerful. So if you just cherry pick and you just randomly teach some sounds, that is often in reality and practice not as powerful as finding a starting point on the spiral curriculum, a best fit, go back to sort of where the beginnings of the gaps are, and follow it from there. And don't skip over bits, follow it, because it will give you so many other skills and it will build up the confidence. So follow that program from there. I'm giving you both options there. You know, you are the person that knows your child. So if you just think a bit of gap filling is going to work for them, great, do that. Ofsted supports you, the reading framework supports you. I'm suggesting from my experience that actually pick a starting point and follow that curriculum and stick with it, and that will have actually bigger impact and quicker impact. I also always advocate start a little earlier than you think. Not because we want them to be bored doing things they've already done, but it builds confidence and it builds their routines. They very quickly learn what you're going to do in that little session with them, so they get on with it quickly, and you don't need to do chatting about what's going to happen in the lesson. So you might have, for example, I mentioned a couple of these. Child A reads fluently, but they're spelling phonetically. They need spelling alternatives. So actually for reading, they're not flagging up as needing more phonics, but you know that their spelling needs more phonics work. So that could be a case for the phonics. Child B reads slowly and hesitates. They're missing their blending fluency. Now, although the fluency can come just from practice and modeling fluency, teaching fluency, lack of fluency can also come from weak code knowledge and going back to your code and going back to your phonics. So again, dig down and unpick what you think is going on. Reading and spelling difficulties can be really tricky to diagnose, actually. We're all looking for the magical golden answer in how to get the exact precise diagnosis, but it takes your skill as well. Children develop coping mechanisms, especially in upper primary. They might appear to read well, but if they aren't confident and fluent, it could be a decoding issue or a vocabulary issue or a comprehension issue. How much code knowledge should we test? Because there's over 180 pieces. That's a huge amount, and that's very difficult to assess all of that. And so I will show you in a moment, using a Rocket Phonics assessment, we wouldn't test all of that. We can get a good feel for it from earlier. And we always go back to the principles. So the principles of what is systematic synthetic phonics: knowledge of the alphabetic code, the skill of blending or decoding, the skill of segmenting for spelling, the skill of handwriting, code level, at word level, at sentence level, and at text level. And as our learners are getting older, those levels have a higher importance because we really want to get them to text level as soon as we can. Here is an example of an assessment from the beginning of the next steps part of Rocket Phonics. So next steps was primarily designed to fit around the Year 2 English National Curriculum. And it really covers a huge amount of the English National Curriculum for Year 2. But next steps is entirely appropriate as a body of content and curriculum coverage to use with older upper primary children. It's often exactly what they need. And we're going to unpick now how that can look. So it might be that actually for your assessments or part of your assessment process that you want to take one of these end of half term assessments and use it right at the very beginning of the year or the period of time you're working with to look at how the children get on with their spelling and how the children get on with their reading. And you can listen to that reading and you can see their comprehension questions as well. So that can be a useful assessment for getting a grip of some spelling and some reading. You can also then measure that over a period of time once you're using the program, measure it at the end and compare. This is an example of just a little part of the baseline assessment in Rocket Phonics. And in the baseline assessment, it goes back to the principles and it tests how much code knowledge do the children know? Can they orally blend, orally segment? Can they blend and segment words of increasing complexity? Can they work at sentence level? Can they work at text level? So it sort of builds on all of those. And this particular part of the baseline I want to point out to you because you'll see that it has some coloured rows. So some of the rows are white and some of the rows are grey. And a question I get asked sometimes is, okay, I assessed their code knowledge. I looked at which letter sounds they knew and how far they got up to, but how do I know where to go back to on the program? Because maybe you're new to Rocket Phonics and you don't know the order of what's in there or the content of what's in there. What's a quick way that I can find where to go and start looking in the program? Well, these rows are your hat. Each set of coloured banding refers to a half-term period, a block of 6 weeks in the programme. So that the first white block, the sort of sat pin block, refers to, right at the beginning of Rocket Phonics, the very first half term that we would typically use with reception children aged 4 to 5 in the first period of time. And then the grey row underneath it, the grey block, refers to the next half term. And Rocket Phonics is organised in these 6-week half-termly blocks. So you can literally count down or match up, marry up and find where to go and look in the programme to track back. That's one way of sort of mapping where are we going to start from, particularly if children are working quite low down in the code. Now, literacy skills, we're talking about phonics and I've touched upon all these other skills that we've got to do. And when we're thinking about our phonics session with upper primary, we want to include as many of these other literacy skills as we can. We want to include code knowledge, simple and complex for reading, for spelling, the handwriting, print to cursive, some grammar, some punctuation, some transcription skills, syntax, things like that, vocabulary, and a little bit of straightforward comprehension and composition without the cognitive demands of complex comprehension and composition. And if you're using a program like Rocket Phonics Next Steps, we are not working with deep, complex comprehension. If you don't want to, you can. There's all the content there to go right down into that. But in terms of kind of as an intervention or as a whole class literacy session with older learners, we don't want the cognitive demands of complex comprehension and composition, as in we're not working with big chunky texts and novels and thinking about that content. We're focusing more on the skills. And that's where the programs could really help us out with that. Another way of thinking about, well, what am I going to be covering? Where does it sit? That spiral curriculum, these progression maps, and these are really worth looking at. You can find these in the intervention guidance booklet. There are copies of these talked about, and then there are larger copies at the end that you can look at and share. And these really show you the content of the program mapped out into those half-term blocks, and you can see how you're revisiting things. So when you've looked at your assessment and thought about what code the children do and don't know, where you might like to start, you might look at, for example, we're looking at the sort of bottom section here, year 2. So this is Next Steps. This is the Next Steps program, the 3rd year of formal phonics teaching, or the content that would be your go-to really with upper primary, unless they're working at a much lower level. Your go-to is this band across here, Next Steps, and you can see, oh, we're going to revisit the A sound alternatives and go quite far with it, the E sound alternatives, the I sound alternatives, the O sound alternatives in that first block of teaching. It might be that for some of your children in that group or that class, they are revisiting the A sound. They've probably been introduced to it before. They're revisiting it. And some children will be looking at 2 or 3 or 4 ways of spelling it. But some other children in that group or that class might be looking at all 8 of those ways of revisiting and spelling it. Because remember, within Rocket Phonics, when we teach, whether we're teaching a small group or whether we're teaching a large class, we want content in that lesson that meets the needs of all of the children at all of their different ability levels, meets them where they're at right now. So we will deliver all of that content, and some children will access some of it and some children will access a lot more of it. Now, also bear that in mind, if your school uses Next Steps already in year 2, and you're thinking, well, hang on, Abby, you're telling us to use Next Steps again in upper primary, but the children already did Next Steps in year 2. I have not met a school yet or a teacher yet who can say to me, hands on heart, that they covered everything in Next Steps in year 2. There is so much content there. People can't squeeze it all in. They take what they need. They teach the parts that they want to, that the children need and that fits into their timetable. But sometimes parts have been done very quickly because there wasn't enough time. Sometimes parts got left off because there wasn't enough time. And that is absolutely fine. We say that is fine. You take the parts that you need. So there is tons there that can be revisited. And it might be that in year 2, your learner was taught with Next Steps. They learned about A, that they'd already learned about when they were younger, but they learned about A, and they were ready to learn about 3 ways of spelling it. Well, now they're in year 3 or year 4 or year 5 or year 6. Now they're in upper primary. They're ready to go back and learn about 5 ways of spelling it, 6 ways, 7 ways, 8 ways. We can spiral within that same resource because there is so much there for them to cover. So I'm waiting in the comments for someone to say to me, you're wrong. We have squeezed the life out of Next Steps. There is nothing left to cover, because nobody said it to me yet, because there is so much there that can be recovered. And I've never met a child yet who said, oh, we've done this before, because it's so quick. So much gets covered. Now, just before I show you the book slide, at the very bottom of this progression map, so it's at the bottom of each chunk, but I want you to look at the very bottom here, where we've got turquoise, purple, gold, and white. When the children are typically in year 2, so this is at the end of the infants, we would like them to be reading through these colour levels. These are the colour bands that they should be progressing through when they're in that year. And Next Steps has been written around tracking and working through those colour bands. It's very clever because children working on Next Steps phonics content can be reading from a lower colour band. They could be working on their blues or their greens because the phonics is repeated in the spiral curriculum. It's very similar, but we're just up-leveling all the time, up-leveling. But this year, this Next Steps year typically follows turquoise, purple, gold, and white. And within the Next Steps program, we map out and we provide for you the books that go with that. So the Rocket Phonics Next Steps, the Comic Street Kids, and Galaxy books that track through, and they are those colours. It might be with your upper primary learners that actually, yes, they're going to use, oh, going the wrong way now, they're going to use Next Steps for the phonics program part, but for their reading books, you want them to have something aged a bit older, the content that has themes that are a bit more appropriate to their age. That's a really, really common question. Well, we're working at a bit of a lower phonics level. Our literacy skills are lower. But these children are older, they're very switched on, they want older content in their books. And Hachette Reading Planet has the most amazing range, Astro books. So they have Cosmos and Astro, these sort of books for older learners, but Astro has been written as a high-low dual banded series. So these match those same colors. So the turquoise and the purple and the gold and the white that you're following through Next Steps. Here are the books at those colors at that pitch level for their reading, but they have age appropriate interest. The interest level is higher. So if I were using Rocket Phonics with my upper primary, I would be using Next Steps as my source program, my core program, picking and selecting and building my lessons with the bits that I need. I would then be using my Astro books as my books that run alongside that, looking at the colors, the turquoise, the purple, the gold, and the white that these literacy levels work at, matching that in with my program, and that's what I would be following. So if you don't already have those, it's worth a look at. Maybe you already have those, but you haven't put 2 and 2 together and seen that they actually match up, and that's how they can work together. And children really love them, and you can see how fabulous they are on the screen. And if you speak to other schools who use them, they are fabulous. That's my recommendation for the books. Excuse me. Now, what upper primary learners need from their phonics, they need the complexity. Even though we're working at maybe lower level literacy, we are spiraling and revisiting some of our phonics. We're not going to baby them with the language we use. We're going to give them that complexity. We're going to be adult with them, the way that we talk about the terminology. They need pace. And I have met colleagues before that work with upper primary children that are not used to working with phonics, who don't realize the importance of that pacey phonics lesson. We don't go slow. We go pacey. We do things, we get on with things, we move it along. We do this part of the lesson. Now we do this part of the lesson. We're ready. We do not go slow and drippy and boring, because it very quickly becomes dull and then we're not making as good progress. We need our materials to be age appropriate, and it's explicit teaching without that babyish. So a series of top tips and pulling in some of the resources. Liaise with the year 2 or the Next Steps teacher. Did they really manage to cover all the content thoroughly? Which parts can you revisit because it needs more in year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6? Which parts do you need or not need? Because often the year 2 Next Steps teacher has chosen whole sections to follow and whole sections not to follow. It's rare that they would try to pack it all in and then it's squeezed. Perception is huge. Most upper primary children would not appreciate you bringing in puppets for the phonics or using perhaps the ditties or even the picture mnemonics unless they have SEN and they need them. Use the proper terminology, show them that phonics is for big kids and adults too. On the flashcards in year 2, you'll notice that the font is different. The font is no longer a babyish font. The font is now a font that is more akin to what the children would see in older level reading books. This is the kind of stuff they see in, books in the library, books, in the bookshop, newspapers. So this font is more grown up for them. Flashcards are massively underrated. The flashcard isn't babyish. The way the flashcard looks could be babyish. So our flashcards here are plain. They're plain flashcards. We don't have a picture on them. If you had children that needed the mnemonic, you can go back to that, or you can develop your own little system of memorizing and putting a picture on. And now we have our word examples on the back. A few top tips with the flashcards. They are really important for learners to retain the ability to identify individual letter sound correspondences and be able to decode new vocabulary. Sometimes children slip backwards if they've not still been doing these. Needs to be quick and slick. You can have print or digital. You can use them online. A5 or A4, not smaller. To me, that's really obvious. I have seen teachers with upper primary holding little piddly tiny bits of flippy paper and the flashcard is not clear. Nobody can see it. We need to value that flashcard and the importance of having a big flashcard. If you can't laminate, print onto card, or do it on your digital screen. A lot of teachers are very modern. They put it on the screen. It can be nice and prompt. Really vital for less confident learners. And you're going to catch the whole range of abilities with these. And you can use the focus cards for the day and then pop on the board. This is our focus today. This is the one that we're learning about at the moment. An example of the big book spread. It is highly likely that if the children use Next Steps in year 2, This was looked at for moments a year ago, and these stories have so much in them. And now if you're revisiting it, if they can remember it, good if they can remember it, because they're going to pull more out of it. They might remember the vocabulary, or you might pull out some new vocabulary that they weren't ready for before. I think you'll agree with me that these illustrations do not look babyish. These children look a little bit older anyway. So I think that that's extremely appropriate for our upper primaries to be revisiting and using these big books. You can always have discussion with your next step teacher about how they might have used them before, how long they spent on them, but it won't have been long. There isn't the time to spend a long time. There is no need to create a PowerPoint. I absolutely would not, never ever be creating a PowerPoint to use in a phonics lesson. I wouldn't do it at any age, but upper primary, absolutely not. You do not need that workload. And they're usually monotonously boring. The big book provides you with the stimulus for teaching. It puts examples in context, so it's within a real book, but it's very specifically crafted for your phonics need. You've got the audio storyteller if you don't want to read, or you can read. You can use a spread over a couple of days and revisit and recap. Just keep it very brief, 5 to 7 minutes, unless you've planned you want to have a much longer lesson. It's just a little introduction. You can use the additional tools if you like. There's so much stuff in there that you can do that won't have been explored before, or if it has, you don't need to use those tools. You can do it a different way. And you can always keep it available if you have digital access for children to access themselves to play like the digital games, but you don't need to do the digital games in your lesson. These are upper primary, you've got more things to be getting on with. So the game could be more of an individual thing. Another thing that might surprise you that I recommend you do with your upper primary is overt blending. Children, I know that you can all read these words already. I know that. But in this session, when we read these words, I want to hear you say each of the sounds, because children can lose that skill of breaking up a word. And then when they come to a brand new word or a really hard word, they don't know how to approach it and how to break it up. So all together, children, I put my finger underneath. Y-E-L-O, yellow. S-I, spy. I-R-A-M-I-D, pyramid. And then you can be talking about, look, that letter Y represents different sounds in these words. That is complex. It is unlikely that all of the children mastered that when they were younger. We need to revisit it. Another top tip, layered learning, building word banks. I hope that children have been doing this with their teachers when they were younger, absolutely, but this is entirely appropriate to be doing into upper primary and beyond, collecting words, linking words together by the way that they're spelled. And this doesn't need to be fancy, just a piece of flip chart paper. These are the sounds or the spellings we've been thinking about in our lesson today or this week or this term. And with upper primary children, when you discover a new word, you go and add it to the poster. You do that independently because it really gets them engaged with what they're doing. So I really advocate for this part of layered learning, building up. And this really then links with your spellings that you might be doing, because in upper primary, you might be thinking about your phonics spelling, your code guiding you through, and overlap or links with any other spelling you might be doing. You might still be doing some other words that you want to select from your curriculum to go with it. And then the pupil practice booklet. Often when teachers use next steps in the pupil practice booklet with the slightly younger children, they do not get through all of these activities. They get through some of them. So I would advocate that these are worth revisiting or looking at which parts did not get used the first time round. The apply and extend, section 7, the chance to apply the phonics, often gets missed off of a next steps lesson because people run out of time. So there's a great activity that you can go straight to. The little piece of text. Now, the first time children maybe use this, they use that piece of text and they were really focusing on the decoding, and they were finding the focus graphemes and a little bit of comprehension. Well, now you're working on the fluency. Now you can go a bit deeper with the comprehension. Now you can go a bit quicker with finding the graphemes and extending it. And this idea of little bits of activities, little 5-minute tasks is really worth doing. Something to mention here on the sentence dictation. Sometimes when people use next steps and they use it with younger children, they will dictate one sentence for the children because there's so much to do. There isn't time. The children aren't ready for 3 sentences. They're only ready for 1 sentence. Well, guess what, upper primary? You're going to dictate 3 sentences. And if it's hard for you and you're slow at it, okay, today we'll do 1, tomorrow we do 2, then we do 3. And then we do 3 every time, because you're also building up their stamina and their resilience. And you can do that because the content is heavily supported. Content's a bit easier. We're a bit working at lower level literacy, so we can build that stamina and build their accuracy. Few top tips for the booklets. Do not go through the lesson content before they start. It needs to be, you know, yes, they're maybe revisiting it from previously, but we're not going to go through it and explain it. We have the same routine so they can get on with it. You don't have to work in order. You can gap fill, you can cherry pick, you can just select 1 or 2 things from here and use it. Your role is either circulating and live marking or supporting a focus group. You don't want to have to do marking afterwards. It happens in the session, live marking, immediate feedback, children marking their own work, but you need to check they marked it accurately. We don't want to ever create extra workload with these sessions. Don't underestimate the value of the extension task, but it's often never been done before. And towards the end of the lesson, if you have time, pull everybody together and pick something, pick one thing to go through. And it might be pick a dictation sentence and somebody writes it on the board, or you mark it together, or I don't know, you might pick a comprehension question, but you want to catch any misconceptions. Don't leave the lesson with anything undone or unsaid. Collaborative marking should be accurate and in the moment. So like I said, if you're going to get children to mark their own work, please check that they marked it correctly, because I've seen mistakes be marked. Emphasize accuracy over speed, but you also want to build stamina. And that's that thing about 1 sentence and 3 sentences. And think about how that impacts onto the expectations of upper primary in the rest of the curriculum. We want them to be writing more and doing more. Teacher modeling should be honest and purposeful. So often with upper primary teachers, they have got a different focus from the teachers of infants. And sometimes our writing, our own writing, our modelling on the board can become less accurate, a little bit sloppy, a little bit more personalised. And I really encourage you that if you want your children to improve their basic literacy and their phonics, you have to go back to really quite accurate modelling and make a joke of it and say to children, oh, I didn't write that very well. Let me write that again. Oh, I've spelled that wrong. Help me spell that. Oh, I can't think of the spelling. Children, help me spell it. Lessons should be pacey but not rushed. And a get started routine is time efficient and helps with behaviours. So the minute they come to your session for phonics or basic literacy, they get started. You don't have a talk at the beginning, they get started on a task, and it could be read a piece of text with your partner, well, any of the tasks in next steps, pick one of those out. Some final thoughts, guys, and appreciate some of you might need to pop off now. We're at the end of the time, but some final thoughts to finish off. Thank you for sticking with me if you're still here. Upper primary children are diverse. Some need a short burst of phonics, others need a structured program. That is okay because phonics is so complex. The alphabetic code remains the same. Age does not change what a child needs to learn. Phonics in upper primary is not going backwards. You're not working behind or going backwards. It's meeting learners where they are and moving them forwards. Apologies for my spelling mistake. I did check my slides, but one still sneaked in. Moving hem forwards should be them, moving them forwards. Accurate diagnosis plus age-appropriate teaching is going to give you really rapid progress and restored confidence. It's absolutely magical and wonderful watching basic literacy sessions, next step sessions with upper primary children. It really is. And when literacy foundations are secure, English becomes easier, richer, and more joyful for everyone. So what you can do next, some of these might apply to you, some of them might not, but just give it a thought. Screen your upper primary classes to identify who still needs some phonics. Is it all of them? Is it some of them? Diagnose as precisely as you can. Use a baseline assessment. Which grapheme phoneme correspondences, which spelling alternatives, what blending and segmenting skills, where are we in this program? Choose a starting point on the spiral and go forwards from there. Use age-appropriate resources such as Rocket Phonics Next Steps and Astro. Teach little and often, high-frequency, targeted practice. Build your lessons using the programs. Work with colleagues, Year 2, Next Steps teacher, your SENCO, your English lead, and really importantly, celebrate progress. Really celebrate and praise accuracy, fluency, confidence, not just academic levels.